The Sterling Manor's crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across Blake Harrison's unassuming figure. He sat hunched in booth 17, calloused fingers wrapped around a water glass that cost more than some people's rent. His faded jeans and worn polo shirt whispered middle-class mediocrity, a perfect lie. The 42-year-old CEO had traded his boardroom armor for this careful disguise, seeking truth in a world built on appearances. Lauren Rodriguez emerged from the amber-lit dining room like a ghost with purpose. Her movements carried the practiced grace of someone who had learned to make herself invisible. Yet her dark eyes burned with something dangerous. Rebellion, perhaps, or desperation. The prime ribeye arrived with theatrical flourish, steam curling upward like incense in a cathedral of lies. Then her hand moved, swift, deliberate. A folded napkin materialized beside the glistening meat, placed with the precision of a surgeon and the secrecy of a spy. Blake's world tilted as he read the trembling words that would ignite a war. They spit in your food. Don't eat it. In that moment, a single question consumed him like wildfire. How did a stranger risk everything to save him? Blake's fork clattered against the porcelain plate, the sound echoing through the hushed dining room like a gunshot. His stomach twisted into knots as he pushed the $28 steak away, untouched. The aroma that had seemed divine moments before now carried the stench of violation. Lauren had vanished back into the kitchen's fluorescent maze, leaving him alone with a truth that burned hotter than acid. He traced the napkin's edges with trembling fingers, each letter carved into his memory like a scar. The elegant restaurant suddenly felt like a mausoleum, filled with the ghosts of dignity destroyed and trust betrayed. The weight of his childhood pressed against his chest like a boulder. Trailer park summers in Alabama rushed back in vivid flashes. The snickers behind cupped hands when his mother cleaned houses for white families. The way restaurant doors would suddenly become locked when his father approached in his work clothes. The taste of humiliation, bitter and metallic, coating his tongue like old pennies. Blake had climbed mountains to escape that world, building sterling technologies from nothing but code and determination. Yet here he sat, 42 years old and worth $800 million, still tasting the same poison that had filled his mouth as a child. His phone buzzed against the mahogany table. Mason's school photo smiled up at him, gap-toothed and innocent. His 9-year-old son knew nothing of boardrooms or billion-dollar deals. To Mason, Daddy was simply the man who made pancakes shaped like dinosaurs and read bedtime stories with voices for every character. Blake's throat constricted as he imagined explaining this moment to his son. How do you tell a child that some people will always see the color of your skin before they see your soul? How do you prepare them for a world that spits in their food while smiling to their face? Amanda's voice whispered through his memory like smoke. Promise me you'll teach him to be strong, but never let him forget to be kind. His wife's final words, spoken through morphine haze and failing breath, carried more weight than any board resolution. She had been his anchor, his translator in a world of unspoken rules and hidden prejudices. Without her, every social interaction felt like navigating a minefield blindfolded. He pulled out his wallet and left 3 $20 bills on the table, payment for food that would forever remain untouched. The money felt like blood money, a tribute to his own naivety. Blake stood on unsteady legs, his designer loafers silent against the Persian rug. The other diners continued their conversations, oblivious to the earthquake that had just shattered his world. An elderly white couple shared champagne and laughter at table 12. A business meeting unfolded at the corner booth, handshakes and promises flowing like wine. Normal people living normal moments, protected by the armor of belonging. He envied their innocence, even as he pitied their ignorance. The brass door handle felt ice-cold beneath his palm as he stepped into the North Carolina evening, cedar-scented air filling his lungs like a baptism. But Lauren Rodriguez haunted his thoughts like an unfinished symphony. Her dark eyes had held secrets deeper than mountain lakes. The way her fingers had trembled as she delivered salvation disguised as service. Who was this woman who had risked her livelihood to save a stranger? Blake sat in his rented Honda, engine idling, watching staff members exit through the service door. Luxury cars and beat-up pickups mingled in the employee parking lot, a testament to the invisible hierarchies that governed their world. He needed answers like a drowning man needed air, and Lauren held the key to questions he didn't even know how to ask. 2 days passed like prison sentences. Blake haunted the edges of Lauren's world like a detective, learning her patterns through careful observation. She lived in a cramped apartment above Martinez Grocery, her bedroom window facing the sunrise. Each morning at 6:30, she emerged in scrubs and sneakers, walking 4 blocks to Cedar Ridge Community College. Books clutched against her chest like armor. Dreams deferred but not destroyed. Her afternoon shift at the Sterling Manor began at 3 o'clock sharp, her server's uniform replacing student clothes like a costume change in a play about broken promises. The public library became his surveillance post, laptop open to fabricated spreadsheets while his eyes tracked her movements. Lauren Rodriguez, age 28, former Duke University Law School student, academic probation after missing too many classes. Grandmother hospitalized with complications from diabetes. Medical bills that multiplied like cancer cells, devouring savings and dreams with equal hunger. She had been 3 semesters away from a law degree when poverty pulled her back to earth like gravity. Now she served overpriced steaks to people who would never remember her name, while studying for the LSAT between dinner rushes and late-night tears. Blake's private investigator delivered the report with clinical efficiency. Lauren's file read like a tragedy written in bureaucratic language. Merit scholarships lost to family obligations. A promising future traded for minimum wage and maximum humiliation. She embodied every nightmare that haunted Blake's sleepless nights, every fear he harbored for Mason's future. Intelligence trapped by circumstance, potential poisoned by prejudice. The photographs showed her studying by streetlight when her apartment's electricity was shut off, her face illuminated by determination that no darkness could extinguish. The revelation hit him like lightning striking twice. Lauren hadn't just saved him from contaminated food that night. She had saved him from contaminated thinking. His comfortable assumptions about service workers and their motivations crumbled like sandcastles against reality's tide. Here was a woman who could have been arguing cases before the Supreme Court, instead serving ribeye to racist customers who saw her as furniture with a pulse. Blake's hands shook as he closed the file, overwhelmed by shame and something deeper. Recognition, perhaps, or kinship forged in the fire of shared humiliation. He returned to the Sterling Manor on a Thursday evening, requesting Lauren's section with casual confidence. She approached his table with practiced neutrality, order pad ready, but her eyes betrayed recognition. They stood at the precipice of a conversation that could change everything or destroy them both. "I'll have the salmon," he said quietly, watching her pen hover over paper. "And I'd like to know why you warned me." Lauren's breathing stopped completely, her knuckles whitening around the order pad. The dining room continued its elegant symphony around them, but they existed in a bubble of dangerous truth. "I don't know what you mean, sir." Her voice carried the practiced emptiness of someone who had learned that honesty was a luxury she couldn't afford. Blake leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice to a whisper that wouldn't travel beyond their table. "They spit in your food. Don't eat it." He repeated her exact words, watching her facade crack like ice under pressure. Lauren's eyes darted toward the kitchen, then back to his face, searching for trap doors in his sincerity. "You could have lost your job," Blake continued, his voice gentle but insistent. "You could still lose your job. Why did you risk everything for a stranger?" The question hung between them like a sword suspended by spider silk. Lauren's shoulders sagged almost imperceptibly, the weight of her secret finally finding voice. "Because I've seen it happen before," she whispered, her words barely audible above the restaurant's ambient noise. "To people who look like you. To people who don't look like the regular customers." Her eyes filled with unshed tears, but her voice remained steady. "I couldn't watch it happen again and do nothing. I just couldn't." The simple honesty of her confession hit Blake harder than any boardroom betrayal ever had. Blake studied her face, memorizing every detail like a cartographer mapping new territory. The faint scar above her left eyebrow, probably from childhood. The way she bit her lower lip when nervous. The stubborn tilt of her chin that spoke of pride, unbroken by circumstance. "What's your name?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Lauren Rodriguez," she replied, her voice growing stronger with each syllable. "And you're not just another customer, are you?" The question carried weight beyond its words, an acknowledgement that their encounter had transcended the boundaries of server and served. "Blake Harrison," he said, extending his hand across the table. Lauren hesitated for a heartbeat before accepting the handshake, her palm warm and slightly calloused from years of work that left no room for softness. "I own Sterling Technologies," Blake continued, watching her eyes widen with recognition. The name carried power in tech circles, but in this moment it felt like a confession rather than credentials. "I came here because I'd heard rumors about how certain customers are treated differently. I needed to see for myself." Lauren's grip tightened slightly before she pulled her hand away, processing the implications of his revelation. "You're testing us," Lauren said, and it wasn't a question. Her voice carried a note of disappointment that cut deeper than accusation. Blake shook his head quickly, desperate to correct her misunderstanding. "I was testing them," he clarified, gesturing towards the kitchen with subtle precision. "I never expected someone like you to exist in a place like this." The words emerged more honestly than he'd intended, revealing his own prejudices in the process. Lauren's expression shifted from wariness to something approaching curiosity, her defensive walls lowering by imperceptible degrees. "Someone like me?" Lauren's eyebrow arched with challenge, but her tone remained neutral. Blake felt heat rise in his cheeks as he recognized the trap his words had created. Someone brilliant enough for law school who chooses to serve tables, he said carefully, then shook his head at his own inadequacy. No, that's not right either. Someone brave enough to risk everything for a principle. Someone who sees injustice and acts even when action could destroy them. His words tumbled out like water through a broken dam, honest but clumsy with the weight of unexamined assumptions. Lauren's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Choice is a luxury, Mr. Harrison, she said, her voice carrying decades of hard-won wisdom. Most of us don't get to choose between principle and survival. We just try to live with the choices circumstances make for us. The salmon arrived with impeccable timing, delivered by a server who melted away without interrupting their conversation. Blake stared at the perfectly plated fish, seeing it not as sustenance but as symbol of the vast gulf between their worlds. $26 for a single piece of salmon, more than Lauren probably made in tips during a slow shift. The silence stretched between them like a bridge neither dared to cross. Blake cut into his salmon with mechanical precision, each bite tasteless despite the chef's obvious skill. Lauren stood beside his table, order pad forgotten, caught between professional obligation and human connection. Other customers began to notice their extended interaction, whispered conversations and pointed glances creating ripples of awareness throughout the dining room. The moment balanced on a knife's edge, pregnant with possibilities and fraught with danger for them both. There's something else, Lauren said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Blake's fork paused midway to his mouth, every nerve ending suddenly alert. It's not just random customers. There's a pattern. Her eyes darted toward the kitchen again, then back to meet his gaze with laser intensity. Customers who dress down but order expensive items. Customers who don't fit the usual demographic. It's systematic. The word hit Blake like a physical blow, confirming his worst suspicions while simultaneously validating his decision to investigate. Blake set down his fork with deliberate care, his appetite completely evaporated. How long has this been happening? He asked, his voice tight with controlled fury. Lauren glanced around the dining room, ensuring their conversation remained private. Since I started working here 8 months ago, probably longer. Her hands trembled slightly as she spoke, the weight of her confession threatening to overwhelm her composure. I've wanted to report it, but I need this job. My grandmother's medical bills, my school loans, they don't care about my conscience. The admission hung between them like smoke from a funeral pyre, thick with the ashes of compromised principles and deferred justice. Blake understood her dilemma with crystalline clarity. She lived in a world where moral luxury was reserved for those who could afford the consequences of righteousness. He had forgotten that privilege, insulated by wealth and success from such impossible choices. What if I told you there might be another way? He said carefully, testing the waters of possibility. What if standing up didn't have to cost you everything? Lauren's eyes searched his face with microscopic intensity, looking for deception or false hope. What are you suggesting? She asked, her voice carrying equal parts desperation and skepticism. Blake leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice to ensure privacy. I'm suggesting that sometimes the right person with the right resources can level the playing field. But I'd need your help to gather evidence. Real evidence that would stand up in court. The word court seemed to electrify Lauren, reminding them both of the legal career that poverty had stolen from her grasp. You're talking about going after Patricia Wells and this whole operation? Lauren said, naming the restaurant's manager with quiet precision. Blake nodded slowly, recognizing that they had crossed into dangerous territory. "I'm talking about justice," he replied, the word carrying weight beyond its syllables. "For you, for me, for every person who's been violated by their hatred." Lauren's breathing quickened slightly, her mind clearly racing through possibilities and consequences. "If we do this," she said carefully, "there's no going back. They'll destroy me if they can." Blake reached into his jacket and withdrew a business card, placing it on the table between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. "Sterling Technologies employs over 500 people," he said quietly. "We're always looking for brilliant minds, especially those with legal training. Whatever happens here, you won't face the consequences alone." The card lay on the white tablecloth like a promise written in elegant script, corporate letterhead carrying the weight of sanctuary and possibility. Lauren stared at the card as if it might burst into flames. "You don't know me," she said, her voice thick with disbelief. "You don't know if I'm trustworthy or competent or anything beyond what happened in that one moment." Blake smiled for the first time since entering the restaurant, the expression transforming his face from worried businessman to something approaching hope. "I know you risked everything to warn a stranger about injustice. I know you've survived circumstances that would break most people. I know you're still fighting for an education while working a job that treats you like invisible furniture." He paused, letting the words settle between them. "That tells me everything I need to know about your character." The evening shift change began around them, day staff yielding territory to night crew with practiced efficiency. Lauren's replacement appeared at Blake's elbow, confusion evident in her expression at finding another server lingering at an occupied table. "Lauren, table 6 is asking for you," the newcomer said, her voice carrying subtle reproof. Lauren nodded quickly, professional mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. "I'll be right there," she replied, then turned back to Blake with decision crystallizing in her dark eyes. "Tomorrow is my day off," Lauren said quietly, slipping Blake's business card into her apron pocket. "If you're serious about this, about justice, then we need to talk somewhere private, somewhere they can't watch or listen." Blake nodded, understanding the gravity of what they were contemplating. "There's a coffee shop called Cedar Grounds on Main Street." 10 in the morning. Lauren's nod was barely perceptible, but it carried the weight of revolution. 10 o'clock, she confirmed, then walked away to tend to table 6, leaving Blake alone with his untouched salmon and the electric anticipation of war. Blake paid his check and left another generous tip, knowing it might be Lauren's last shift at the Sterling Manor. The parking lot stretched before him like a battlefield waiting for dawn, streetlights casting long shadows between the luxury sedans and economy cars. His rental Honda looked deliberately modest among the BMWs and Mercedes, camouflage in a war zone of class and privilege. As he drove away, Blake caught a glimpse of Lauren through the restaurant's windows, moving between tables with grace born of necessity, serving customers who would never see her as fully human. Cedar Grounds occupied a converted Victorian house on Main Street, its wraparound porch and bay windows offering sanctuary from the corporate sterility that dominated downtown Cedar Ridge. Blake arrived 15 minutes early, choosing a corner table with clear sight lines to both entrances. The coffee shop's eclectic clientele included college students, local artists, and business people who preferred authenticity to franchise predictability. Vintage guitars hung on exposed brick walls, and the aroma of freshly ground beans mingled with the sweet scent of homemade pastries. Lauren appeared precisely at 10 o'clock, her civilian clothes revealing the woman beneath the server's uniform. Dark jeans and a cream-colored sweater that emphasized her natural beauty without pretense. She'd pulled her hair back in a simple ponytail, and Blake noticed she wore no makeup, her face open and honest in the morning light streaming through tall windows. She ordered black coffee and a plain bagel, choices that spoke of careful budgeting and practical necessity. Blake waited until she was seated across from him before beginning the conversation that would change both their lives forever. "I spent the last 2 days learning about you," Blake said without preamble, watching Lauren's expression shift from curiosity to alarm. "Before you get angry, you should know what I discovered." He slid a manila folder across the small table, its contents representing hours of investigation and thousands of dollars in private detective fees. Lauren Rodriguez, former pre-law student at Duke University, merit scholarship recipient, academic probation due to excessive absences caused by family medical emergencies, currently enrolled part-time at Cedar Ridge Community College, maintaining a 4.0 GPA while working full-time at the Sterling Manor. Lauren's fingers traced the folder's edges without opening it, her expression cycling through invasion of privacy, resignation, and something approaching relief. "So now you know," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of dreams deferred and dignity intact despite circumstances. "I'm not some noble crusader. I'm just a woman trying to survive and take care of the people I love." Blake leaned forward, his voice intense with conviction. "That's exactly why you're the perfect crusader. You understand the cost of justice because you're paying it every single day." "What exactly are you proposing?" Lauren asked, finally opening the folder to scan its contents. Her academic transcripts, employment records, and financial situation laid bare in neat columns and clinical language. Blake watched her face as she processed seeing her life reduced to data points and statistical analysis. "I'm proposing we gather evidence of systematic discrimination at the Sterling Manor. Document it, record it, build a case that can't be dismissed or covered up." He paused, letting the magnitude of their undertaking settle between them. "And I'm proposing we do it together, as partners rather than employer and employee." Lauren closed the folder and met his gaze directly, her dark eyes reflecting years of hard choices and harder lessons. "Partners," she repeated, testing the word like unfamiliar food. "What does that mean in practical terms?" Blake had prepared for this question, but the reality of answering it felt more complex than any business negotiation he'd ever navigated. "It means you help me understand the restaurant's operations from the inside. Document incidents, identify patterns, gather testimonials from other affected customers or staff members." He paused, then continued with careful precision. "And it means that regardless of what happens, you finish law school on Sterling Technologies' scholarship program." The offer hung between them like sunlight after a storm, too bright and warm to be immediately trusted. Lauren's hands trembled slightly as she processed the implications of Blake's proposal. "You barely know me," she said, echoing her previous concern with added intensity. "How do you know I won't take your money and disappear? How do you know I'm not setting you up somehow?" Blake smiled at her skepticism, recognizing the voice of someone who had learned that good fortune often carried hidden prices. Because someone setting me up wouldn't ask those questions. And because desperation makes people do desperate things, but it doesn't make honest people dishonest. There's something you need to understand about the Sterling Manor, Lauren said, leaning forward conspiratorially. It's not just Patricia Wells and a few racist kitchen staff. The discrimination goes deeper than that. It's institutionalized, systematic, protected by people with real power in this community. Blake felt his pulse quicken as Lauren continued, her voice growing stronger with each revelation. The owner, Charles Whitmore, sits on the city council. His brother-in-law is the police chief. His daughter married the district attorney's son. We're not just talking about fighting a restaurant. We're talking about challenging an entire power structure. The revelation should have frightened Blake, but instead it energized him like electricity through copper wire. He had built sterling technologies by competing against established giants, by finding ways to outmaneuver opponents with superior resources and political connections. Good, he said simply, his voice carrying quiet confidence that made Lauren's eyebrows rise. David versus Goliath stories are my specialty. The bigger they are, the more satisfying their fall. Lauren studied his face for signs of bravado or naive optimism, finding instead the steady determination of someone accustomed to turning disadvantage into victory. "What about your son?" Lauren asked suddenly, the question catching Blake off guard. "Mason, right? 9 years old, goes to Cedar Ridge Elementary. What happens to him when Charles Whitmore decides to make this personal?" Blake's blood chilled at the implied threat, parental instincts warring with his desire for justice. Lauren had done her own research, clearly, and the knowledge that his child could become a target transformed the stakes entirely. "That's exactly why this has to stop," he said after a long moment. "I won't raise my son in a world where people like Whitmore can poison food and threaten children with impunity." Lauren nodded slowly, recognizing the shift in Blake's motivation from abstract justice to concrete protection. "Then we need to be smarter than they are. More careful, more patient, more thorough." She pulled a small notebook from her purse, its pages filled with careful handwriting and detailed observations. "I've been documenting incidents for months. Dates, times, customers affected, staff involved. I never planned to do anything with it, but some instinct told me to keep records." Blake felt hope surge through his chest like dawn breaking over mountains. "Show me," he said simply, and Lauren opened her notebook to reveal a meticulous catalogue of discrimination and hatred. The next 2 hours passed in intense collaboration as Lauren walked Blake through her observations. Incident reports written in careful longhand, customer descriptions that painted pictures of humiliation and degradation. A black businessman who received soup with a fly in it. A Latino family whose order was consistently delayed until their food arrived cold. An elderly Jewish couple who found bacon grease in their supposedly vegetarian meal. Each entry told a story of systematic cruelty, disguised as innocent mistakes, creating a pattern that would be impossible to dismiss in court. "This is incredible," Blake said, meaning every word. "You've documented a federal civil rights case without even realizing it." Lauren's cheeks flushed with pride at his praise. Years of feeling invisible and undervalued, suddenly replaced by recognition of her intelligence and capability. "I did realize it," she corrected gently. "I just didn't think anyone would care about what a waitress had to say." Blake closed the notebook with reverent care. understanding that he held evidence that could topple an empire of prejudice. Everyone's going to care when they see this, especially when we add video evidence to support your written documentation. Video evidence? Lauren's voice carried a note of alarm. You're talking about recording in the restaurant. That's incredibly dangerous. If they catch us? Blake reached across the table and touched her hand briefly, his skin warm and reassuring against her uncertainty. They won't catch us because we're going to be very, very careful. And because I have resources they don't know about. He withdrew a small device from his jacket pocket, no larger than a button, but clearly sophisticated technology. State-of-the-art surveillance equipment, virtually undetectable, admissible in court, and capable of recording both audio and video in high definition. Lauren stared at the tiny device with mixture of fascination and terror. You want me to wear that? Into the sterling manner? Blake nodded seriously, understanding the magnitude of what he was asking. For one shift, just one shift where you document everything exactly as it happens, with your notebook providing context and pattern, and the video providing undeniable proof, we'll have enough evidence to destroy their operation permanently. Lauren picked up the device with trembling fingers, its weight somehow heavier than physics should allow. If they discover this, I'm not just fired. I'm ruined, blacklisted from every restaurant in 3 counties. If they discover it, you're also rich. Blake said with quiet intensity. Because I'll sue them for wrongful termination, harassment, and violation of whistleblower protection laws. Charles Whitmore's political connections won't protect him from federal civil rights violations. Lauren met his gaze, searching for the confidence she needed to take the leap that would change everything. You really believe we can win? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Blake's smile carried the weight of every victory he'd ever achieved against impossible odds. I believe we can't afford to lose. And neither can the next person they decide to humiliate. Lauren slipped the recording device into her purse with hands that had stopped trembling. When? She asked, the single word carrying volumes of commitment and courage. Blake checked his watch, calculating timing and logistics with the precision that had made him successful. Tomorrow night. Friday evening is their busiest time, which means the most opportunities for incidents and the least likelihood anyone will notice unusual behavior. He paused, then added with gentle concern, Are you sure about this? Once we start, there's no going back. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Lauren replied, her voice carrying strength that surprised them both. Blake felt something shift in the air between them, the transformation of strangers into allies, into something approaching friendship. Then tomorrow night we make history, he said, extending his hand across the table. Lauren shook it firmly, her grip steady and sure. In that moment they became more than co-conspirators. They became partners in the oldest fight humanity had ever known, the battle between justice and power, between truth and comfortable lies. The next 24 hours crawled by like hours in a dentist's chair. Blake spent the day reviewing legal precedents and consulting with attorneys who specialized in civil rights cases. Lauren worked her afternoon shift at the Sterling Manor, hyper-aware of every interaction, every subtle sign of discrimination that had become so normalized she'd stopped noticing. The recording device in her locker felt like a nuclear weapon waiting to be armed, its potential for destruction and justice equally terrifying. Friday evening arrived with typical restaurant chaos. The Sterling Manors dining room filled with couples celebrating anniversaries, business associates entertaining clients, and families marking special occasions. Lauren moved through her section with practiced efficiency. The tiny recording device clipped inside her collar like a technological guardian angel. Blake sat at the bar, nursing a whiskey he didn't want, his presence providing psychological support and legal witness to whatever unfolded. The first incident occurred at 7:30. A young black couple, celebrating their engagement, requested a table with a view, only to be seated beside the kitchen doors despite multiple empty tables by the windows. Lauren watched Patricia Wells orchestrate the seating arrangement with subtle gestures and meaningful glances, her discrimination so practiced it appeared accidental to casual observers. The recording device captured every word, every gesture, every moment of institutional prejudice operating under cover of professional courtesy. By 8 o'clock, Lauren had documented 3 separate incidents: contaminated food for minority customers, deliberately slow service for anyone who didn't fit the restaurant's preferred demographic, and overcharges on bills that would be difficult to dispute without creating uncomfortable scenes. The pattern her notebook had revealed played out in real time, validated by high-definition video and crystal-clear audio. Blake watched from the bar, his rage building like pressure in a kettle, each incident adding heat to his determination for justice. The evening's climactic moment arrived at 9:15. A Latino family with 2 young children ordered the restaurant's most expensive family meal, their celebration of a job promotion about to be poisoned by hatred disguised as hospitality. Lauren watched Rick disappear into the walk-in cooler with their order, emerging with a smirk that made her stomach turn. She followed protocol exactly as Blake had instructed, positioning herself to capture clear video evidence of the contamination while maintaining her cover as an oblivious server. What she saw exceeded even her worst expectations. Rick didn't just spit in their food. He ground his cigarette ash into their children's mac and cheese, muttering racial slurs that the recording device captured with devastating clarity. Patricia Wells watched from the pass, her approval evident in every line of her body language. The scene unfolded like a masterclass in systematic dehumanization, each action calculated to degrade and humiliate customers whose only crime was existing while different. Lauren's hands shook as she watched the contaminated food leave the kitchen, heading toward a table where 2 children waited eagerly for their special dinner. Everything inside her screamed to intervene, to protect those innocent kids from consuming hatred along with their meal. But Blake's instructions echoed in her memory. Document everything. Intervene only if someone's safety was at immediate risk. She compromised by spilling water on the family's table as she passed, creating enough distraction and delay that the food would arrive cold and unappetizing, reducing the likelihood they would eat much of it. Blake appeared at her elbow, as if summoned by telepathy. "Are you okay?" he whispered, his presence steadying her nerves like an anchor in a storm. Lauren nodded shakily, patting her collar where the recording device had captured enough evidence to end careers and possibly send people to prison. "It's worse than we thought," she murmured back, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "Much worse." Blake's jaw clenched as he processed her words, understanding that they had documented something that would haunt their dreams and fuel their determination in equal measure. The shift ended at 10 o'clock with Lauren's usual closing duties, wiping down tables, counting tips, and pretending that everything was normal while carrying proof of systematic hatred in her pocket. Blake waited in the parking lot, engine running, ready to spirit away their evidence before anyone realized what had transpired. Lauren emerged from the restaurant's service entrance with forced casualness, her movements betraying none of the adrenaline coursing through her veins like rocket fuel. They drove to Blake's hotel room in silence, both processing the magnitude of what they had accomplished and what it meant for everyone involved. The recording device yielded its secrets to Blake's laptop with clinical efficiency, high-definition video, and pristine audio painting an undeniable picture of systematic discrimination. Lauren watched herself on screen, seeing her own courage reflected in pixels and sound waves, finally understanding that she was no longer a victim but an agent of change. "This is it," Blake said simply, his voice thick with emotion as the video evidence played on his laptop screen. "This is everything we need to destroy them completely." Lauren nodded, exhausted but exhilarated, feeling like a soldier who'd survived a crucial battle in a war that was far from over. "What happens now?" she asked, suddenly aware that their clandestine partnership was about to become very public very quickly. Blake smiled grimly, his expression promising swift and devastating justice. "Now we call the FBI." The next 72 hours unfolded like a carefully choreographed ballet of justice. FBI agents arrived at the Sterling Manor with search warrants and subpoenas, their presence transforming the elegant restaurant into a crime scene. Patricia Wells and Rick were arrested on federal civil rights violations, their perp walk captured by news cameras that had somehow appeared at exactly the right moment. Charles Whitmore's political connections proved powerless against video evidence, and federal prosecutors who had seen enough discrimination to fuel their righteous anger for decades. Lauren found herself at the center of a media storm she never could have imagined. News outlets from across the nation picked up the story of the waitress who had risked everything to expose systematic racism, her courage inspiring editorial writers and social media influencers in equal measure. Death threats and marriage proposals arrived in her mailbox with equal frequency, the polarized response reflecting America's complicated relationship with racial justice and uncomfortable truths. Blake shielded her from the worst of the attention while ensuring she received credit for her bravery. Sterling Technologies' legal team handled the mountain of paperwork generated by federal investigations and civil lawsuits, their expertise transforming Lauren's notebook and video evidence into weapons of legal destruction. The Lauren Rodriguez Courage Scholarship was announced within a week, providing full tuition and living expenses for minority students pursuing legal education, ensuring her legacy would inspire future generations of justice seekers. The Sterling Manor closed permanently after just 5 days of federal investigation. Charles Whitmore's empire crumbled like a house of cards in a hurricane, his political career ending in resignation letters and criminal indictments. His restaurant became a symbol of institutionalized hatred, finally meeting its match in the form of courage, technology, and the American legal system functioning exactly as it was designed to function. The building was eventually purchased by a community group and converted into a multicultural center, irony and justice occupying the same physical space. Lauren never returned to serving tables. Blake's promise of a full scholarship to complete law school became reality within 30 days, her admission to Duke University Law School expedited by administrators who recognized both her academic potential and her proven commitment to civil rights. She moved into a campus apartment with Blake's financial support, her grandmother's medical care secured by the settlement money from multiple discrimination lawsuits that followed the federal case. 6 months later, Blake and Lauren met for coffee at the same Cedar Grounds table where their partnership had begun. Lauren wore a Duke Law School sweatshirt and carried textbooks that no longer represented impossible dreams, but daily reality. Blake looked older, but more relaxed, the weight of carrying secrets replaced by the satisfaction of justice achieved. Mason had adapted well to the media attention, telling his classmates that his daddy was a superhero who fought bad guys with cameras and lawyers instead of capes and superpowers. "Any regrets?" Blake asked, stirring sugar into coffee he wouldn't drink, the question carrying weight beyond its simple words. Lauren considered carefully, her answer shaped by months of reflection and growth. "Only that it took so long," she replied honestly. "That I watched them hurt people for 8 months before finding the courage to act." Blake nodded understanding, recognizing the survivor's guilt that accompanied their victory. Courage isn't about the absence of fear. It's about acting despite fear, exactly like you did. Their conversation was interrupted by Lauren's phone, buzzing with a text message from her civil rights law professor. An internship opportunity with the Southern Poverty Law Center, working on restaurant discrimination cases inspired by her own experience. Lauren showed Blake the message, her excitement evident in every line of her expression. "Full circle," she said simply, and Blake understood that their partnership had evolved into something neither had anticipated, a friendship forged in fire and tempered by shared purpose. Blake paid for their coffee and walked Lauren to her car, a reliable Honda Civic purchased with settlement money and chosen for practicality rather than status. "Thank you," she said, the words inadequate for everything he had made possible, but carrying sincere gratitude nonetheless. Blake smiled, remembering the terrified waitress who had risked everything to warn a stranger about contaminated food. "Thank you for reminding me that courage comes in all forms, including a folded napkin with 7 words that changed everything." As Lauren drove back to Durham for her evening constitutional law class, Blake reflected on the ripple effects of their collaboration. 3 more restaurants in North Carolina had been investigated and closed for discrimination following copycat complaints from emboldened customers. Federal civil rights enforcement had been strengthened by precedents established in their case. Most importantly, a generation of service workers had learned that power could be challenged, that justice was possible, and that sometimes the right person with the right resources would amplify their voices into thunderclaps of change. Blake returned to Cedar Ridge that evening to have dinner with Mason at their favorite diner, a family-owned establishment where the food was simple and honest, and everyone was treated with dignity regardless of their appearance or accent. Mason chatted about his day at school, his homework assignments, and his upcoming baseball game, blissfully unaware that his father had helped reshape the world into a slightly more just place. As they shared chocolate cake and vanilla ice cream, Blake felt the satisfaction that comes from keeping promises to the dead and protecting the living. The Sterling Manor investigation had officially concluded, but its impact continued to reverberate through Cedar Ridge and beyond. Blake's company had relocated its regional headquarters to the town, bringing high-paying tech jobs and diversity initiatives that transformed the local economy and social fabric. Lauren's scholarship program had expanded to include not just legal education, but all fields of study, creating opportunities for students who had previously been invisible to institutional power structures. On quiet evenings, when Mason was asleep and the house was still, Blake sometimes thought about that folded napkin and the 7 words that had changed everything. They spit in your food. Don't eat it. Such simple words, but they had contained the power to topple empires and transform lives. He kept the napkin in his desk drawer, a reminder that courage often comes disguised as ordinary people doing extraordinary things when circumstances demand it. Lauren Rodriguez had returned to Duke University Law School as a celebrity and graduated as a scholar. Her thesis on workplace discrimination and whistleblower protection became required reading in civil rights courses across the nation. She passed the North Carolina bar exam with scores that surprised no one who knew her story, then accepted a position with the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, where she continued the work that had begun with a contaminated steak and a moment of moral courage. Years later, when law students studied the Sterling Manor case in constitutional law classes, they learned about systematic discrimination, federal civil rights enforcement, and the power of technology to document injustice. But the real lesson was simpler and more profound. Sometimes changing the world starts with a single person deciding they can't watch. Suffering continue without acting, even when action might cost them everything they've worked to achieve. Blake Harrison had learned that being a billionaire meant nothing if those billions couldn't be used to protect the powerless and punish those who abused their authority. Lauren Rodriguez had learned that her intelligence and courage were not limited by circumstances or economic status, that justice was not a luxury reserved for the wealthy, but a right that could be claimed by anyone brave enough to demand it. Their partnership had ended the way all good partnerships should, with both parties stronger than they had been individually, their shared experience creating ripples of positive change that would continue long after their names were forgotten. But in Cedar Ridge, North Carolina, in a building that had once housed hatred and now welcomed everyone, a plaque reminded visitors that ordinary people could accomplish extraordinary things when they chose courage over comfort, truth over silence, and justice over convenience. The inscription read simply, "In memory of all who spoke up when others stayed silent, and in honor of those who transform whispered warnings into thunderclaps of change.